Hey everybody, welcome back to Brainstorm Lore, and welcome to the final episode in the early history of Middle-earth. When we last left off, Feanor had just cemented his status as worst elf ever by threatening his half-brother Fingolfin with a sword, for which crime he was banished from Valinor for a period of 12 years. True, he had been manipulated into it by Melkor, but that did not in any way excuse his crime. And since his father Finwë, king of the Noldor elves, chose to follow Feanor into exile, Fingolfin ruled as acting king for the duration. Melkor had long since gone into hiding, but not before making one last effort to try and turn Feanor to the dark side. 12 years passed peacefully, and at last Manwë, leader of the Valar, decided that the time had come to try and patch things up with Feanor. Manwë arranged for a great feast in which the Valar and Maiar would attend, as well as the Vanyar and Noldor elves. The Teleri chose to stay by the ocean as per usual. Manwë also extended an invitation to both Feanor and Finwë as well. Feanor chose to attend, though Finwë did not, saying that he would not leave Formenos until his eldest son's banishment had been lifted. Of course, Feanor was still Feanor, and was still pretty grumpy over his justly deserved punishment for threatening people and being a pointy-eared ass. Still, at first, Manwë's plan seemed to be working. Fingolfin once again restated his willingness to forgive Feanor for what he had done before, recognizing that both he and his half-brother had been manipulated by Melkor into causing strife. He also laid to rest the old rivalry between them by formally acknowledging Feanor as Finwë's heir. And so, probably for the first time in their lives, the two half-brothers actually got along together. The bad blood that lay between them wasn't all gone, but it was a step in the right direction, and all seemed to be going exactly as Manwë had hoped. And that was when Melkor made his move. When he had fled Valinor for good, Melkor had gone south, far beyond the light of the two trees, and there he found Ungoliant. Ungoliant had been one of the Maiar that Melkor had turned to his side shortly after the creation of the world. But unlike Sauron and the Balrogs, Ungoliant had decided at the last minute to reject Melkor and serve no other master but herself and her appetites. For Ungoliant, who took the form of a giant spider, hungered to consume all light, even as she hated it. Basically, if you took a black hole, gave it 8 legs, and a very nasty personality, you would have Ungoliant. Melkor convinced Ungoliant to help him by basically promising her all the light that she could eat. And so, hiding under a web of darkness spun by Ungoliant to disguise them, the pair snuck into Valinor while everyone was at the reconciliation feast. They arrived at the two trees, and then Melkor proceeded to hack great gashes into their trunks with his weapon. And then, as the glowing sap proceeded to spill forth from them like blood from open wounds, Ungoliant began to feed. And she must have been a really fast eater, because she managed to suck both trees dry and then consume all of the lakes of glowing nectar before anyone could react. And as the Valar and elves flailed about in the new darkness, Melkor and his accomplice made their escape. His vengeance had been achieved. However, all was not yet lost. After the Valar had recovered themselves and figured out what was going on, Yavanna, the creator of the two trees, informed them that there was still a chance that they could be saved and their light restored. When Feanor had created the Silmarils, he had incorporated the light of the two trees in their making. And so the Valar asked Feanor if he would allow them to break open the 3 gems and use their light to reignite the trees. But Feanor was still Feanor. He was even more possessive of the Silmarils than ever, and refused to hand over his greatest creation. Travel must be incredibly fast in Valinor because it was at this point that a messenger arrived from Formenos. Apparently, after destroying the two trees, Melkor had attacked the stronghold of Feanor, killing his father Finwë and stealing all of his treasures, including the Silmarils. Upon hearing this news, Feanor, well, he didn't quite go off the deep end, but he did go right up to the edge of said deep end and thought long and hard about diving off it. To his credit, Fëanor was more grieved by his father's murder than by the theft of the Silmarils, though he was still pretty cheesed off about that too. He cursed Melkor, naming him Morgoth, the Black Enemy, the name by which he would be known forever after. But he also cursed the Valar, blaming them for leading him away from his home, somehow thinking that had he still been at Formenos, he might have somehow prevented his father's killing and the theft of the Silmarils. Once again, fairness requires me to point out that Fëanor was pretty much grief-stricken and enraged, so he could hardly be accused of thinking rationally at this point. Consumed by his desire for revenge, and conveniently ignoring the fact that he was still technically banished, Fëanor assembled the Noldor elves in the main square of the city of Tirion. As eldest son and heir of Finwë, he claimed kingship of the Noldor, and declared in many florid and fiery words that he was going to pursue Morgoth, avenge his father's murder, recover the Silmarils, and also reclaim the lands in Middle-earth that he felt rightfully belonged to his people. For he, like many others, still believed Morgoth's lie that the Valar had intended to keep the elves in Valinor and allow men to usurp their rightful place in Middle-earth. A few Noldor, like Fëanor's youngest half-brother Finarfin, spoke against such rash action, but the vast majority of the Noldor were carried away by Fëanor's words and agreed to follow him. At this point, the newly minted king of the Noldor and his 7 sons drew their swords and swore the now infamous Oath of Fëanor. It was an oath sworn in the name of Eru Ilúvatar, the Creator himself, with the Valar as witnesses, that they would not cease to pursue the Silmarils and recover them, and if necessary enact violence, even murderous violence, upon anyone, mortal, god, demon, or elf, that dared withhold them. Unlike many a cynical modern fantasy of today, in Tolkien's world, solemn oaths are indeed binding, and this oath was going to haunt the Noldor for generations to come. Not long after the oath was made, the vast majority of the Noldor departed from Valinor. The Noldor contingent, it would be something of a stretch to call this an army, was divided into roughly 3 groups. The frontmost contingent followed Fëanor. The second and by far the largest group followed Fingolfin, while the third and smallest group brought up the rear, led by a reluctant Finarfin. Meanwhile, Morgoth and Ungoliant had by this point almost completed their long journey northwards to the Dark Lord's former strongholds. Ungoliant had grown incredibly large and incredibly powerful from consuming the light of the 2 trees, yet, in keeping with my black hole comparison, she was still hungry for more. She demanded that Morgoth give over the gems that he had stolen from Formenos, and such was her power that Morgoth feared to fight her, and reluctantly agreed. But when Ungoliant demanded the Silmarils as well, Morgoth flatly refused, and the 2 began to fight. Only the timely intervention of Morgoth's Balrogs saved the Dark Lord from being defeated, and losing the treasure he had risked so much to obtain. Ungoliant was driven away, and as far as we know, she completely disappears from the history of Middle-earth at this point. She would go on to be the mother of all the giant spiders that plague Middle-earth, Shelob being the most famous of her children. The Silmarillion speculates that at some point she returned back to her hiding place in the far south, hiding from the light that she yearned for, yet also hated and feared, and eventually died when her hunger drove her insane and caused her to eat herself. As for Morgoth, he established himself in the great northern fortress of Angband, surrounded by his followers such as Sauron and the Balrogs. The Silmarils, consecrated against evil, had burnt his hands black, even though he had been carrying them in their crystal case. Eventually, he set the 3 gems into an iron crown which he wore upon his brow, though the Silmarillion says that even then the gems continued to pain him. He would rule in the north for centuries until his final defeat at the end of the First Age. In the end, Morgoth had gotten what he'd wanted. He had turned the Noldor against the Valar, and he had acquired the Silmarils. But in keeping with Tolkien's theme that evil is itself self-defeating, he derived no pleasure from either. Meanwhile, back in Aman, the new king of the Noldor was faced with a dilemma. Feanor was eager to catch up with Morgoth and recover the Silmarils, but he was limited in his options as to how to get to Middle-earth. The only land route was far to the north, across a sea of shifting ice known as the Hel Caraxae. The only other way was by boat across the ocean. But the Noldor's skill had always been in building, gem crafting, and metallurgy, not the making of ships. And so Feanor, leading his contingent ahead of the others, made for Aquilonde to ask King Olwe of the Teleri if he could borrow their swan ships. Olwe refused. He explained to Feanor that just as the Silmarils were irreplaceable to him, so the swan ships were irreplaceable to the Teleri, and they would not give them willingly. Now, for those of you who've been following this series so far, if any of you have had any doubts as to whether or not Feanor truly is the worst elf ever, and I don't just mean in terms of Tolkien's universe, I mean period, then what happened next should remove all doubt. When the Teleri would not give him the ships he wanted willingly, he resolved to take them by force. And when the Teleri resisted, the Noldor drew their swords and began to kill them. You have to realize here that apart from Finwë's murder by Morgoth, this was the first time elves had ever died by violence. And now they were being killed by the dozens, if not hundreds. It only got worse when Fingolfin and his contingent of the Noldor arrived on the scene. They saw the fighting, assumed that Feanor had been attacked, and joined in. Only Finarfin and his followers were, thankfully, too slow to take part in what became known as the First Kinslaying. For me, this moment in the Silmarillion, this, quote, historical massacre, is what makes Tolkien's elves so special and so different from all the imitators that have come since. Tolkien's elves, like all the elves that have come after them, are superior to men in every way, and they know it. But what Tolkien's elves possess that the imitators do not is the awareness that while they are capable of greater good, they are also capable of greater evil, of greater folly, greater crimes. To paraphrase a saying from Tolkien's contemporary and friend C.S. Lewis, you don't make a devil out of ants or fleas. You need an archangel to make a devil. Like I said, the elves are fully aware of the wrongs they've committed by the time of Lord of the Rings itself. And this is why in the books, characters like Galadriel come off as very sad and noble instead of patronizing. This is also why I don't particularly like Elrond's treatment of Aragorn in the Peter Jackson films. Not only is this character dynamic completely superfluous, as it didn't exist in the books, it also makes Elrond look like a giant hypocrite. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. After the first kinslaying, the Noldor contingent made its way along the coast, as they didn't have enough boats to carry all of them across in one go. It was at this point that a figure appeared before them in the road. Some say it was a messenger of the Valar, others say it was Mandos himself. What is known is that the Valar knew what the Noldor had done, and they were so angry that they were going to curse the Noldor in their entirety and curse Feanor in particular to punish them for their wrongdoing. This curse, known as the Doom of Mandos, reads as follows: Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you, and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentations shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed to you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon, and by torment, and by grief, and your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. And long shall ye abide, and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom you have slain should entreat for you. and those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane, and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken." Unsurprisingly, the Noldor were quite unnerved by this pronouncement of their own doom. Finarfin, who, you remember, had not taken part in the kinslaying, and who was by this point thoroughly fed up with Feanor, decided to turn back, taking with him any who would join him to go back to Valinor and beg the Valar for forgiveness for their transgressions. The Valar, of course, forgave Finarfin, and he would rule as king of the Noldor who remained in Valinor forever after. Feanor, of course, ignored this pronouncement of doom because he was Feanor. As for Fingolfin, he felt that he'd already come too far to just turn back. The Noldor continued their northward journey, looking for a good place to launch the ships from. By now, of course, Fingolfin and his followers knew what had really happened at Aquilonde, and as time passed, more and more of them began to resent Feanor and speak out against him, cursing him for leading them to this. Feanor, of course, was nothing if not spiteful, and so, when they finally found a good launching place, Feanor, whose contingent controlled the ships, led his followers and his followers only across the sea and then burnt the boats where they lay at anchor. When Fingolfin and his followers saw the flames, they realized what had happened. But, once again, Fingolfin thought he'd come too far to give up now, and so he decided to lead his people across the grinding ice of the Hel Caraxae. Most, including Fingolfin himself and his sons, would survive that long, freezing, perilous journey, but many died, and those who survived would arrive in Middle-earth hating Feanor almost as much as they hated Morgoth. Meanwhile, back in Valinor, the Valar, now that the Silmarils were lost to them, were trying desperately to revive the trees, but to no avail. In the end, they only managed to restore just enough life that each produced a final remnant of itself. Telperion, the silver tree, produced a single flower. Laurelin, the golden tree, a single fruit. These remnants by themselves were not enough to restore the light of the two trees, but they could be used for something else. Aule created vessels to contain each of these remnants and their light. The vessel for Telperion's last flower was the moon. The vessel for Laurelin's last fruit, the sun. In keeping with the fact that Telperion had been a male tree and Laurelin a female, two Maiar, a male and female respectively, were chosen as the guardians of these vessels. First, the Maia Isil took the moon and brought it forth into the night sky, both in recognition of the fact that Telperion was the elder of the two trees, and also because the elves had loved it first and best. All the elves saw the moon rise into the sky. The Vanyar at the feet of the Valar in Valinor, Olwe and his people saw it rise above the harbors of Aquilonde. Feanor saw it as his people rested on the shores of Middle-earth. Fingolfin saw it as he led his people in turn across the treacherous ice of the Hel Caraxae. And Elwë and his grey elves saw it rise above their forest home. Then, after a time, the Maia Arian brought forth the sun into the sky, both because Laurelin had been the younger of the two trees and in honor of the second-born children of Iluvatar. For as the sun rose for the first time, the race of men at last awoke in lands far to the east. The sun was much more powerful than the moon, and Morgoth's creations and even Morgoth himself could not abide its light. And as the sun rose for the first time, Fingolfin and his people had finally completed their journey of the Hel Caraxae, and now stood upon the soil of Middle-earth. The years of the trees had ended, and the first age of the years of the sun had begun. And here, at last, the story ends for now. The players are different, but now the world is the same. At last, the world of Tolkien is as we would recognize it. Obviously, there are many stories between the beginning of the First Age and the War of the Ring, but those stories will have to wait for another time. For now, In anticipation of a certain trailer that I hear will be coming soon, it is only fitting that we transition from the greatest fantasy universe in all of literature to the greatest sci-fi universe in all of literature. Next week, let us return to the universe of Dune. Until then. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out our website at studiobrainstorm.net. And if you have a story that you think is worth telling, we are more than happy to help you publish it. Thank you, and have a nice day.